letting go. Guns, 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 time to start the show.
Unless you're brand new to the channel, you know that we have a desire here to always push the limits of our skills and try harder and harder things to better ourselves. And that is going to be no different with what we attempt here today with my FDesWorks slide and Mischief Machine Commander grip module and the associated parts, obviously, for my P320 build. We are going to be attempting probably the hardest Cerakote job I've ever tried. How do I know that already without doing it? Because I've been doing tests, so I know what goes into it. You'll often see this referred to as cell shading or Borderlands style. But at the end of the day, what it is it is a color or multiple colors with black and sometimes white. We'll get to why sometimes white later, but black and sometimes white lines that add interesting visual effect to your build. Now, let's look at some examples here. The purpose of this is obviously to make the build look very flat. And what I mean by that is in terms of like dimensionality, make it look cartoony, like it's 2D almost. And a lot of that is happening by A, using a flat, so usually non-metallic color, B, with the nice placement of these lines, often accenting things like edges, and C, you'll often see other techniques being used, which we will explore on this build, such as utilizing specifically pastel colors to get that cartoony feel, and then adding a little white and a little black to do some like ever so slight shading across a single pastel color. And then the other thing that you'll sometimes see is coming over the color and the lines after the fact and basically hitting it with a splatter effect to give it a little like grain texture, which can also add to that kind of cartoony feel. I do want to say though that my absolute favorite person for this is, I'm going to call him Thor. Username on Reddit is down there, but he was one of the first people that I saw this style come out of his shop. He remains probably consistently my favorite person to see work of this style in. And also, I remember back very soon after he started posting, he actually gave out the recipe on how to do this. And basically what that is you spray down your base coat and you put it in the oven just to the point that it's still tacky. You cannot let it get tack free or else this doesn't work. But then you go and you use these Posca paint pens to cell shade the areas that you want to get the aesthetic that you're looking for, and then you put it back in the oven to fully cure. I was having some issues figuring out how to get the white to work, so I actually posted my problems on Reddit, and sure enough, he even came back and not only said, oh yeah, you're barking up the wrong tree, the white's never gonna work correctly unless you put a clear coat over it. It's not as color fast as the black pen. But he also said, oh, and I've also done a full, in detail, much deeper description of the entire process than the one I posted here. It's over on the ARFCOM forum. Here's the link. So mad props to him. We are going to follow his process. I am just going to show you how I'm doing it. And we are also going to discuss some of the aesthetic things that we see going on in the placement of our cell shading and how that, as well as some of those other techniques like color fades and speckling, help do that full aesthetic. Now, mind you, minus my test swatches, this is my first time doing it. You're watching me learn from this walkthrough. So at the end, we will test it with an acetone test and all that sort of fun stuff to make sure that we did it correctly, but please don't judge me on it being the best possible cell shade, because on top of there being technical aspects on how this works, there are also artistic aspects on how to make a good cell shading finish. And that obviously you're going to get better with the more you do them. Before we get to the actual work, I want to talk about some prerequisites that you're going to need in order to do this type of finish. If you have not watched mine or someone else's video on just generically how to apply Cerakote, you should probably master that skill first. If you don't get a nice base coat, none of this that you learn here is going to matter, and I'm not teaching that skill over again in this video. The other thing that you should understand is the differences between a full cure and two different types of partial cure. One of them is going to be called a tack-free partial cure, and you can learn about that in my camo Cerakote video. And then the other one, the one we'll be using here, is a partial cure where you still have some tackiness to the finish. We're going to focus on that in this video, but if you want an extra prerequisite where I do talk about that a little bit, you can go learn about that in my battle-worn finish Cerakote video as well. Okay, let's talk about the swatches that I've already done for tests. And I've done a bunch of them, but these are the two that I want to focus on. If we flip them over, I have already tested them for color fastness. And what I mean by that is we should be able to wipe our finish with a acetone rag, and it should survive. And that is our color as well as the pen marks. And as you'll see here, this orange one was pulled out of the oven when it was tack free. So I touched it, no stickiness at all. This was too late. As you can see, when I wiped it with acetone, it pulled off almost all of the white pen, and it pulled off enough of the black pen that it does not look good. So while we don't generally attack guns with acetone, they are involved with solvents all the time during cleaning, so this is not good enough. So full tack, partial cure, no. The second one here I pulled out when it was still tacky. However, by the time it had cooled off, it was tack free. And what you can see here is the acetone didn't pull off all of the white, but it did pull off enough of it to where it doesn't look good. However, the black had pretty good color fastness. So while this, if you're doing only black lines, would be probably acceptable, I still think we can pull it out earlier to where it still is slightly tacky after the piece has cooled down, and that would be even better, because as Thor describes in his full instructional, what you're essentially doing with these Posca paint pens is you are dyeing the still wet Cerakote with additional pigment. That pigment is mixing in with the non-fully cured Cerakote layer. The solvents in these pens are evaporating off as we let it flash cure before putting it back in the oven. And then finally, when it does go into the oven for the final cure, all the solvents left over from any residual from the pens, as well as anything left in the Cerakote, is all being fully off-gas. So essentially, the paint is melting in, or dyeing, for a better example, your base coat when done correctly. So that is the goal that we're trying to get with the process we're learning today. It is also worth noting that I highly suggest that you go and do some test swatches with just scrap material so that you can play with this. It has a much less forgiving window for when you pull this out and it works than any other partial cure process we've done for complex Cerakote in the past. It is the least forgiving, and therefore you need the most practice to get it right. That was just an introduction to the idea, though. I'm about to actually let you watch me do this entire process, and I will explain it in much greater detail as you watch me do each of the various steps. However, the last thing I want to talk about before we get to that is the artistic aspect of cell shading. The reason I want to do this is because I want to help anyone that has had any artistic background avoid a mistake that I think you're going to want to do. If you have ever taken a drawing class or a sketching class, or heck, you've worked in IT and you've done user interfaces, you've probably learned that light sources naturally come from above and they cast shadows, and we can predict where those shadows are cast. So for example, if we have a box and we want to make it seem like this box is sunk into this page with the light source coming from here, what we would do is we would provide a shadow along the top and along the side. And now that makes it seem like this sits further in the page than this, because again, the light's coming here. It cannot therefore hit the top of the inside or the left of the inside. If we want to make our box look like it is sitting out above the page, we would do the opposite. We would put a shadow down the right side outside the box and along the bottom. So the light source is casting a shadow on it like that. Why do I bring this up? Because that is not how cell shading works. Do not do that. It is not going to look like cell shading. If you think back to the examples that I showed up on the screen, if you try and do that, it is not going to look right. And again, if you've ever had any art class and you remember this, you're probably going to want to do that, because that's immediately what comes to mind when you think of shadows and highlights. You're going to want to add shadows where things shadow and highlights where light hits things. So opposite the shadows, the tops of cylinder shapes, all that sort of fun. That's not what's going on here. If you look at these examples, it's much more haphazard than that. Oftentimes it is used to accentuate edges. And then the other thing that it is used for is to give texture and just kind of whimsy to larger flat surfaces. And that is, I think, where a lot of the artistic nature comes in. Any of us can come and find edges and highlight them, or low light them technically, using a black Posca paint pen. It's that whimsy and cartoony feel that you add with just random slash aesthetics, or like a little Z shape, or all of those very high character adding effects. I think that's where the art comes in. And I think that's probably where I'll fall a little flat compared to someone like Thor, who has done a ton of these and has developed that gut feeling for where you should add the lowlights and where you should add the character effects. But let's get started. Oh, and one last thing, because of how the white reacts and Thor saying that you do have to put a clear coat over your final product if you are looking to use a white Posca pen, we are only going to be focusing on black lowlights and character marks in this particular video. I will not be doing any white lines, and I will not be doing a clear coat over that. If you want to do that, he says that the process is exactly the same as what you're about to see me do, just you're allowed to use white pens as well. And then after the final full cure of the project, you come back and you utilize C series, so the air dry series Cerakote clear coat on top. I would recommend a matte because, again, we're trying to keep things flat looking. And the reason you don't use the H series clear coat is because that is supposed to go on top of wet Cerakote. So as you'll see why in just a minute, that won't work here. Here's the actual project, and as you can see, I already have my base coat laid down. The key here, though, is that this base coat has only been sprayed and then gassed out for 15 minutes. This has not had any type of oven cure at all yet. The reason being, we are going to take our leftover base color and add some white or black to it so we can do some shading work. The paint pen work we're going to do later must all be done on freshly flash cured Cerakote. Therefore, if we need to do multiple colors, we must use a wet on wet technique. We cannot flash cure between these colors, as that would make the earlier colors too cured for the pen work to melt in. I chose to go with highlights, so I'm adding Stormtrooper white to my leftover Aztec teal here. I was originally adding droplets of white and hardener, but honestly, it took way more to get the color noticeably different from the base coat. So off screen, I mixed up some pure white and just added a bunch. I probably ended up with about a quarter white by the time I liked the shade enough to spray it. This is an optional step. You could just go with a single color, but this shading work provides some additional visual interest. It keeps the piece looking very flat while still adding a concept almost akin to the object reacting to light, which hints at a cartoony concept of 3D. Also, you don't have to use a lightened up version of your color. You could also do this with a darkened version, or I've even seen it done with completely different colors like yellow over blue. Get creative. The spray pattern we'll use here is similar to the one we've used in the past for camo work. We'll dial in a little bit of fan and then some fluid, but not quite the 1-to-1 ratio that these Pache HG08 guns like. It's more like a ratio of 1 fan to half a turn fluid. From there, we are restricting the air just until the spray pattern fully atomizes and gives us a clean fade with no splatter. The key here is to just lay down an extremely thin and light coat of this color, faded into our still wet base coat. I decided to do fades up at the nose of the grip and slide, the rear, and then also a bit down at the bottom of the grip and into the magwell. Remember, this is meant to portray the cartoon world. The cartoon world does not abide by physics and perfect lighting characteristics. Don't overthink it. Pick the spots you want to highlight and just go with it. The effect is very subtle and hard to show on camera here, but I'll be able to show you better in the final cured product. From here, we will once again let it gas out for a minimum of 15 minutes before putting it into our oven. We are going to flash cure it a little differently than normal though. Set your oven to the lowest setting that will still fluctuate around 150 degrees Fahrenheit. My DIY oven cycles up and down about 20 degrees, so I usually flash between 150 and 170, averaging to 160. You want to be extra careful here though, as this style of flash cure has an even smaller window of success than usual. So here I prefer to cycle from about 140 to 160 for an average of 150. We are trying to pull the items out of the oven when they are still tacky. In fact, if there's still a tiny bit of color transfer to your glove when you pull them out, that's fine too. You will just have to test them regularly with your oven to get a feel for it. For me, my small parts only needed about 6 minutes. Larger metal parts and plastic parts needed 8 to 9, and then heavy metal parts like the frame, barrel, and slide went for a full 15 minutes. You can see here the glove marks I left when testing on a spot that will not be visible when the gun is complete. After letting them cool to room temperature, we're going to add our cell shading with the Posca paint pen. Because the items were hot when we pulled them out of the oven, the coating will have continued to cure a bit more. Even if pulled out when there was a little bit of paint transfer on the glove when tested, that is likely gone now. But this is still a soft coating. You want to keep the paint pen flowing so that you don't have to press hard with it. This is why you will see me drawing on my test board and the back of my glove every now and then. Where and how you apply your pen lines is the real art of this technique, but some general guidelines from my research and my own experimentation are to accent edges. Also, wide open flat spaces suck for this style, so give them some character with a squiggle or a Z shape or some weird lines. Do not try to be clean and perfect here. That's actually counter to the style. One of the things I really like to do with edges that follow one another is to partially accent them so that they have some overlap, but are mostly alternating in where they are accented outside of that minor overlap area. Also, notice how I'm able to hold the pieces with my gloved hand, but how I'm also being light with my touch. If you pulled it out at the right time, you can get away with touching it at this stage. But you can risk marks if you really grab it hard or squeeze or scratch it. You're probably going to think you're doing too much accent work. You're not. Just remember that we are using extremely flat colors and then accenting a bunch of edges and surfaces. This means that anything you don't accent is going to look even more flat and unadorned by comparison. Until you figure out your style, I would say err on the side of more, not less pen work. Lastly, if you're trying to accent the inside of recesses or pockets, you will have to push the pen sort of hard into the inside edges in order to get full coverage. I did not have any issues doing this, go ahead, but I'd say only do it where you have to. Don't forget to get your small parts too. This style is so focused on sheen that you can't afford to not coat every part of the gun that will be visible once assembled. So yes, we are even going to do the screws, and we are going to accent them too. It is a tedious style, but you'll see just how worth it is in the end. Like our shading earlier was optional, we have one more optional step: splatter. Splatter adds more visual interest, especially in its ability to break up the monotony of those larger flat surfaces. It also gives the gun a graininess akin to old school printed cartoons. Like I said, optional, but another cool technique to take your work to the next level. For this, we will take a dark color like black or a dark gray and set our fan to 0, dial in some fluid, like half a turn on my Pache spray gun, and then slowly bring the air on from 0. It will take almost no air, very little. Play with your fluid and air knobs until you get the splatter size you like. You will also need to play with how far away from the surface you do the splattering as well when you pull the trigger. These 3 variables will help you get the right size spot in your splatter, and the distance you do it from will also help drastically reduce any actual spray mist you get along with your splatter. Now, go to town on all your pieces. If you're going to do this, do it everywhere. Bald spots will stand out like a sore thumb, especially on lighter colored projects. Whether you do just pen work or if you're doing the splatter too, be sure to let everything off gas for a minimum of 15 minutes before putting it in the oven to cure. This is our final cure, but be sure, regardless of material type, to put everything in at 150 degrees for at least 15 minutes first, so that the sheen is locked in at the same temperature for all parts. The initial cure temperature affects Cerakote's glossiness. Lower initial cures mean more matte, which is what we want for this flat aesthetic. From there, just cure as per normal. And there we have it, our results. And before we get into the artistic and opinion related portions of our analysis of the results, let's talk about the 3 things that actually matter from a Cerakote application perspective. The first one is this finish durable? Well, as you can see, I have installed the rear and front sights in the dovetails. And as you can see, except for a tiny little scratch that I made with a punch, they did not pull up material when they were put in. So not only are they durable, but we have a thin enough finish that they still fit in without removing any material. So that's a really good sign to start with for durability, and it hints that we're probably going to be really good in terms of finish thickness. I've got the mill gauge zeroed out for aluminum. Let's give this a look. Pretty good. And that was where we had 2 colors. Up here, where we're starting to get into the fade, it was a little bit more, but we're still definitely within spec. How about on our cover, which is an easier thing to Cerakote because it's got fewer complex surfaces? Yeah, that's nice. That's really nice. I re-zeroed this on a piece of steel. I'm not 100% sure how much it actually matters for accurate results, but I try to get into the habit of zeroing on the same material. Nice. The last test is, do we have color fast black pen lines? Did it actually melt into our Cerakote? And I'm going to do my test on this piece here simply because it actually turns out that this mount doesn't work with the screw attachment style of this slide. So I actually have to design and make a new one of these. So if it's going to fail, I'd rather have it fail on something I'm not going to be using. Acetone rag. We are color safe. So it passes all 3 tests for quality of application. With those quality tests out of the way, let's talk about the subjective outcomes, the artistic aspects of this project, what I liked, what I didn't. Let's start with the things that I didn't like. When I did my splatter, and actually these 3 parts on the slide as well, when I did those, I took black and I added it to the leftover, a tiny bit of it, not a ton, but a tiny bit of the leftover of this color, the light color. And that's what gave me this gray. But it's a gray that has similar hues to the blues that we used everywhere else. So I thought, oh, that's gonna be nice. That's gonna fit in very well from a color theory perspective. And it does. I mean, these gray appointments go beautifully with the rest of the build. There's two places where that theory fell apart. The first one was they don't go great, the speckles, on the chocolate brown. So I'm gonna see if I can't show y'all. If I get real up close, you can see the speckles where they cross over the black of my pen lines, and it almost makes my pen lines look interrupted, or like parts were scraped off or something. And the reason for that is that gray is not anywhere else on these brown parts. And so when they cover that black, it just looks like it's interrupting. They don't blend in, they add disruption. So at least for the brown parts, I would use pure black for my speckling in the future. One, because of that phenomenon, and then the other one is they get lost in the brown elsewhere. So they basically don't work on the darker color anyways. They just disrupt the pen lines. So not my favorite outcome. Use black speckling if you're using black pen. The second thing is, while I do like the gray speckling, I don't think it's any nicer than if I had just done black speckling. So I was mixing this already anyways, sure, fine, I had it. But given the negatives associated with where I used it on the brown sections, I'm just gonna go with black speckling religiously in the future. That'll be my main takeaway. The other thing that I'm not absolutely in love with is I broke my own rule in one spot. I forgot that the back of this magazine is going to be a piece that you can see, albeit it's a very small piece at the back in the bottom. But I probably should have sprayed the actual body of the magazine as well, because that now it's shinier and it's got this wear pattern that nowhere else on the pistol has. It shows you just how important that concept of making sure you do this process to every single piece that will show as humanly possible. I even did the FCU because the rails show from the back a little bit, and you can see it through the window here in the grip. So I should have followed that advice on that area. And you'll actually see that I don't have the gun together, and that's because I can't find the slide release, and I don't remember spraying it either. So once I do find it, I fear that I'm going to have to pull the guns out again and do some more work. So maybe I will do the magazine at that point in time. But honestly, those are the only things I don't like about it. I thought it was a fun process. It was a lot of work, but definitely a fun process. And I will be doing more of these. This is just such a cool look. I even broke one of my rules here on the grip panels. I did not speckle those. And I actually didn't do any pen work on these as well, because as you can see here, the pen work on highly textured areas is difficult. The pen doesn't want to get down in there. So after trying this and sort of failing a little bit, I said, I'm not going to bother on the texture of the grips. And I actually think that worked out fine. I actually honestly think it worked out fine without the speckling too, but that could just be because I don't like the gray speckling on the brown. It may not be a rule that you have to hit everything with the speckling if you're going to do some of it. This turned out beautifully. I really do like the fade color as well. So we've got the light up here at the nose, which then gets to the normal Aztec teal as we go back, and then comes back to the light as we get here at the end. And then we've got the light coming back into the equation down here into our mag well. The only real negative out of any of the process is both this magwell as well as the piece here have almost like a cracking in the coat where the black is. And these are the two pieces that I did last when I was doing pen work. I think I set my alarm to let them off gas prior to putting them in the oven when I was done with the major pieces, and then I went and was like, oh shoot, I gotta do these last two little things again. So that is probably the result of not letting it off gas, or I guess for the pen, it's more like not letting it dry fully prior to putting it in the oven, because those are the only two pieces that did it, and they're the only pieces that didn't have as much time before going in the oven. As you can see, there's none of that on any of the other sections. And so that's why I added that little note in the process section about like, let it sit for a full 15 minutes, everything, every step, including when you're doing the pen work. That requires drying too. Now, as we saw with the test on the adapter plate, that didn't actually hurt the paint's ability to stick, but that cracking is slightly odd on those two little pieces. And finally, let's talk about the stylistic elements that I really think worked well. I think on places like this, little squiggles, like random, they don't always work. Like, I don't think those two are great, but man, all the work on this trigger guard, I think those squiggles are fantastic. Having a little consistency with your edge hits and it kind of evolving as it goes. So it was like heavy to the front and side here, and it got lighter as it went up, and then it started encroaching on this side and became a little more sporadic. So evolving those edge hits, but still keeping the theme fairly similar as you go along. I think that worked really well. I like all the squiggles that surround like changes in geometry. So here around the safety, I think that one's cool. Around these cuts for the ergonomics at the rear, those are cool. You do kind of have to do something in these wide open spaces like here. So that required a squiggle of some sort. And then also for places that I didn't do any accent work with the pen, just having those lines around where those pieces will go, I think really helped out. And I'm a fan of the mix of the small and the large lines. So I think that worked out really well. And again, a lot of this is sloppy, messy. It's not perfectly straight. You want that. That is what gives this aesthetic. Don't shy away from it. This is supposed to be cartoony. The more I truly think about this style of finish, the more I have to believe that factories putting out this style can't be doing it this way. Just how persnickety each different material and part size is with when you need to pull it out of the oven in order for it to be color fast. It's just not really sustainable on a large scale. So I have to believe that any companies doing this style of finish are using the other method we discussed earlier with the C series air dry clear coat over the H series colors and Posca pens, that one that allows you to use white pens as well. I have to imagine that that is how they are doing their coatings, or else it's just not financially viable for them, like I said, at scale, which is a little foreshadowing because now I kind of have convinced myself I need to learn that style too and probably do a project with that.